I am back from Finland, where I was leading a retreat for ministers, mostly in the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Finland. And it was about a 3 to 4 day retreat, and my part was focused on First Peter. And these ministers, not all of them were priests, as they call them in the Lutheran Church, but some were just connected with the church. Really helpful for them. And it's something that Jesus did with his volunteers. If you see, he took them aside and gave them special instructions and gave them extended time with God and with himself. And I wonder, when was the last extended time that you had with God? Hey everybody, welcome to the Sanctus Forum. I am Michael Stewart Robb, better known as Mike. These videos, the podcast, it's sponsored by Sanctus, a European Institute for Theology and Spiritual Formation. If you don't know what spiritual formation is, don't worry about it. If you don't know what Europe is, well, let me tell you. Europe is actually, geographically, just the peninsula of Asia. And it's strange, if you think about it, why we thought that we should call it a separate continent. It's not difficult to get here from Asia, which many tribes over the course of human history have figured out. And the reason is that a long time ago, Jesus was on the earth, but not in Europe, and he invited some volunteers to participate in the work that he was doing among the Jews. And those volunteers were incredibly successful in Europe, so much so that it only makes sense to think of Europe separate from the rest of Asia. And that is an influence that continues up until today, and it will not easily be wiped out. That's just the way that history works, and how deep that influence was. Now, if you are here and are a follower of Jesus, as I am, I live in Europe, I'm a follower of Jesus, and maybe you are also a volunteer. Maybe you also have tried to do some of the work that Jesus invites people to do, the kind of serving of other people and that. And therefore, I want to ask you, when was your last time that you had an extended time with God? Because Jesus did that for his people. He set them apart, he took them away, and they had some training, and they had time to spend with God. And when was your last time? Now, one thing I know about it is you have to plan for this. You probably are not going to have a spontaneous extended time with God. Most of us are just frankly too busy for this. And you may need some help, especially if you've never done it before. And that is precisely the reason why we have created this course or retreat called Among Wolves, Serving Like Jesus. And oh no, he's talking about it again. Yeah, I am going to stop because this is the last week. On November 18th, it's a Monday, we are going to close the doors, and I don't know what's going to happen after that. We may not do it anymore. It certainly will be next year if we do make it available, but that we just haven't figured that out yet. So this is a real chance to get in, and I don't know what's going to happen after that. Now, you don't have to finish it before November 18th, but if you do want to get into it, then you should get into it now so that you can have it perhaps around Christmas or after Christmas in January, whenever. It would be a good time for you to plan that extended time with God. Now, I am going to here just give you some access to that course, to the teachings there, and this is from the very first lesson, let's call it, which I gave, and I am talking about the very first time that Jesus sends out his volunteers, his deputies, as I call them, and the instructions that he gives to them. And so without further ado, here it is. Welcome to Among Wolves, Serving Like Jesus. Jesus, when he's giving the 12 instructions, he says, "Go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." And there's a double use of sheep here. You've got sheep that people are like sheep without a shepherd, and then later Jesus says, "Go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." And I wanted to call our attention to it and just you can see if you agree with me, but how similar Europe is to Israel in this situation. And North America is similar too, but you've got a lot of sheep, people that are connected in some way with a people of God, and they aren't the opposite here for Jesus. It's really the Gentiles, and you see this kind of come up in the text where he says, don't go to the Gentiles, don't worry about them, just worry about the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And Europe too is a continent, is one that has it has a long connection with Jesus all over the place, and people may have lost contact with a shepherd, may have lost contact with the church, but that influence is still there on this continent, and it's something that you really can't make sense of what's happening here if you don't recognize the influence that Jesus and Jesus' people have had on here. And Europe is like Israel in the sense that they both have their leaders. Israel was not in Jesus' day without leaders, people that were responsible for the people, for the sheep. And Europe too has ministers, priests, church leaders, whatever you want to call them, all over the place. And yet, and this is an interesting part of Jesus' point, that the people are still lost. The sheep are still lost. They're still harassed and helpless. So it's not sort of for lack of leadership or lack of people who are supposed to be role models that the sheep are in trouble. It's sort of despite that, which is an interesting parallel here with this continent and with the West in general. You've got role models, you've got authority figures, you've got leaders, teachers, and yet the people are not doing so well. And the issue is what's the problem? Why would Jesus call this out? And the problem is that clearly something about the leadership isn't working. Clearly the ministry, the people who are supposed to be leading the flock are not doing a great job. And you see this is the beginning in the Gospel of Matthew, and really in all the Gospels, of Jesus' critique of let's call it the church leadership in Israel. The people who were supposed to be doing something aren't doing it. And I think that it's interesting here in this case that the problem that Jesus sees in Israel is not a world problem. It's not, the Romans are after us, or people are so attracted to pagan stuff. It's a church problem, that there's something a matter with Israel internally that's causing this problem. And in a sense, Jesus is just doing some whistleblowing among Israel's pastors, just saying, calling it out and saying, we've got a problem. And then he's going to kind of have these deputies kind of step in and do something different. I think one of the differences between Europe and Israel is, and think about this with me, is that we have here not just churched sheep, we have churched and unchurched sheep. We have people who are connected with Jesus in some perhaps very distant way, or they're connected with God in some very distant way. The heritage is still there, but they haven't been to church in a while. They're not terribly educated and up to speed on what I don't know, following God is all about. But there's still this connection. They aren't, in a sense, full-on Gentiles, full-on pagans, people that have never had contact with the message of Israel or the message of God. And that's the Christian influence of Europe. We can talk a long time about that and where you would still see that. And the second thing I want to point out, the first thing was really just it's not a world problem, it's a church problem. The second thing is that this first mission, Jesus sending out these people, is an intra-church mission. So you've got the kind of Great Commission at the end of Matthew, but this here is Jesus sending his disciples into churches, really, or at least into church as sort of a more broader global context. And it's very explicit, don't bother about the Romans, don't bother about anybody else, pagans, just hang out with Christians, hang out with Israelites. Very interesting program that's happening here. And that's the group, if you kind of move back in the text where Jesus says the harvest is plentiful, that's the group he's talking about. He's talking about people that have a connection with Jesus, with a connection with God and the history of Israel. Well, I hope that gives you a better idea of what you could expect if you joined our retreat course, and you will get access to Alone Together, the documentary that I've been talking about all year, 45 minutes. You've probably seen the trailer already. But that's just this week until November 18th. You may only have a couple days. Links will be in the description. Thanks for being here. See you next time. Bye. You really do have to plan. It's not just going to happen to you.